and welcome everyone. And it's so good to be with all of you again. And we are going to be continuing to finish up the section about the plague on locusts and begin the plague of darkness, the second to last plague. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And here is the screen share. Okay, and this time I left a marking for where this was. And let me take care of this. Just a little bit of housekeeping here. All right. Vayafoch Hashem Ruach Yam. So the previous sentence said that Moses left Pharaoh's presence and they prayed to God. Vayafoch Hashem Ruach Yam Chazak. And God, Yahafoch is like to turn over. A Ruach Yam would be a westerly wind. Chazak, very strong, Chazak Ma'od, a very powerful westerly wind. Boy, that's a bit of a tongue twister. Vayisa et ha'arbe, and it carried the locusts. Vayitkaehu, and it drove them Yamasuf, towards the Sea of Reeds. Lo nishar arbe echad, not one locust remained. B'chol gvul Mitzrayim, in the entire border, within the entire borders of Egypt. Let's see, here we go. Ruach Yam, a westerly wind. Ruach Maravi, that's simply what he says, because the word Yam simply means a sea wind. And what they're referring to is when it says sea, my guess is that it would be referring to the Mediterranean Sea, because that's the largest sea that's there. On the other hand, I'm wondering if it isn't referring to the Red Sea, although then it wouldn't be blowing into the Red Sea. So, because it doesn't.
Well, I think when you're in
it could make sense.
Israel,
Sorry, go ahead.
when you're in Eretz Israel, then Yam means to the west, because the Mediterranean is to your west.
Right.
So it could be, from the point of view of a Hebrew speaker who's in Eretz Israel, it just means a westerly wind.
Right.
But
And go ahead.
then Ruach Maravi, and then Rashi says Yam Asuf, towards Yam Suf, which would also be a westerly wind if you're in Egypt.
It would make sense, because a westerly wind means a wind that comes from the west. When you say an east wind, you're talking about a wind that comes from the east. So if it was a wind that came from the west, if you can imagine and visualize the map of Egypt and where the Red Sea is in relationship to Egypt, the Red Sea is on the east side of Egypt. And so it would make sense that a westerly wind would carry the locusts eastward towards the Red Sea. It would make sense. So, Yamasuf, Omer Ani, I say. So Rashi is introducing this by saying that this is his opinion. She Yamsuf Hayam Miktsato B'Ma'arav. So it's interesting, because in some ways this is difficult to understand. He says that Yamsuf, that the Sea of Reeds, Hayam Miktsato, as a fraction of it, a portion of it, was the Ma'arav, in the west. Keneged kol ruach dromit, but on the southern side, the ruach dromit means, in this case, ruach means side, on the south side. So it means corresponding to the south side, or the southern border, something like that. V'gam b'mizrach shel Eretz Yisrael, and it would be on the east of the land of Israel, which doesn't make a lot of sense at all, frankly. It just feels like the opposite. Lefichach, however, therefore, Ruach Yam, a west wind, tak'o la'arbe, or tak'u la'arbe, would have carried the locusts by Yamasuf Kenegdo to the Sea of Reeds opposite. V'chein matzinu le'inyan techumim. And we find this regarding the borders of the land of Israel is what he's talking about, because in the book of Numbers, they outline the actual borders of the land of Israel. Shehu poneh letzad mizrach, because he's saying he faces the east, shene'emar, as it states, in here's Shemot Kaf Gimel, this is Exodus 23, Miyam Suf v'ad Yam Plishtim, from the sea of this. I don't know why this would be Shemot. I don't know if Lauren. I don't know if you have anything in your book that gives a different reference. Miyam Suf v'ad Yam Plishtim, from the Sea of Reeds until the Sea of the Philistines, and that would be the Mediterranean Sea. Mimizrach lema'arav, from the east to the west. Sheyam Plishtim b'ma'arav, because the Mediterranean Sea was in the west, which is okay. I believe, again, if you visualize the Sea of, the Red Sea in relationship to the Mediterranean Sea, I think you'd head in a basically in a northwesterly direction. Haya, because the Mediterranean Sea, the Ma'arav Haya, was on the west, Shene'emar, and it states again Beplishtim regarding the Philistines from Zephaniah, the prophet Zephaniah, Yoshvei Chevel Hayam, who inhabited the section of the sea, Goy, I think it's Cretim, a nation of Cheretites. So Chevel Yam would be the western border. So yeah,
my translation just does not mention Mediterranean at all.
Just says a Philistine Sea.
It says from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines. Yeah.
Right. You should understand the Sea of the Philistines means the Mediterranean Sea.
Okay.
That does. All right. So, I mean, I'm not going to try and unpack that. It certainly would require further elucidation, because in some ways geographically it's tough to understand. Unless Rashi is understanding wind direction in the opposite way that I explained it. So, which is possible. I know that in English, an east wind means it's coming from the east, but it's possible that the way Rashi understands this is that an east wind means a wind that's blowing towards the east. I don't know. And then on the other hand, there are parts of this that do seem to make sense. Lo nish'a arba echad, not one locust remained. And the fact that it says not, it doesn't say Lo nish'ar arbe, there were no locusts remaining. It just says there was no locust remaining, which not one locust remaining. So why does it have to go to that extent?
Rabbi,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't know if you wanted to know that Chabad has an extensive parenthetical statement about the last Rashi.
Okay. Let's do that. It's fine. I can interrupt what I'm doing now. We can come back to it, and I'd appreciate your reading it. Please, go ahead.
It says Rashi's apparently referring to the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Eilat, which are both branches of the Red Sea, and thus are included in the expression, and they're calling it Red Sea, Sea of Reeds. The latter is the eastern boundary of the Holy Land, while the Gulf of Suez is Egypt's eastern boundary. Since the Philistines dwell on the Mediterranean seacoast, the Sea of Reeds mentioned in that context was surely the Gulf of Eilat. The Sea of Reeds mentioned here is the Gulf of Suez, where the locusts were deposited.
Okay, well, thank you. There's something there that doesn't make sense either. So it says that the Gulf of Eilat was the eastern border of Israel. Did it say that? Lauren, can you hear me?
I can. I'm looking back into the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I need a map.
I can't see you right now, so I just basically am looking at my screen share at the text. That's why I couldn't tell.
Yes, it says, when it says the latter, I think they're referring to the Gulf of Eilat, which it calls the eastern boundary of the Holy Land.
I'm thinking visually right now. That's hard to understand. I don't think that the person who wrote this particular commentary for Chabad is having much of an easier time than I am, is my sense, because it's very hard to understand the sea of the Palestine of the Palestines, which is what he says, Palestine. That's not referring to the Mediterranean Sea. It's hard for me to imagine why that ever would be said, because the Philistines never lived there at all. That wasn't where they lived. They clearly lived along the border of the Mediterranean. Anyway, I mean, I don't want to take a lot of time over it, but just it's, as we would say in Hebrew text, they would say tzarich iyun. This requires further investigation. All right. Well, and I'm happy to leave it like that. I think we've got some. Hopefully, we'll have the time. There's a Torah Tmima that I'd like to get to, if we do today. That is really very, very cool, and we'll have to I'll just leave you in suspense. At any rate, thank you though. There was not one locust remaining. And this is what Rashi says. It's just beautiful. It's based on rabbinic material. Af hameluchim, even the salted ones, shemelchu mehem, of which they salted. In other words, they did eat some of these locusts and they salted them. Not one of them remained either. That's why it says not one remained, not even the ones that had been salted for consumption. Onwards. Now we get into, we'll see where this goes. Vayechazek Hashem et lev paro, and Hashem's hardened the heart of Pharaoh. V'lo shilach et bnei Israel, and so he did not send or release the children of Israel. And now we get into the plague of darkness. The ninth plague. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem said to Moses, Netei yadcha al hashamayim, stretch out your hand towards the heavens. Vahi, or means over the heavens. Vahi choshech, and let there be darkness al eretz Mitzrayim, over the land of Egypt. Vayamesh choshech. Now this vayamesh, you'll see, Rashi is going to have to play around with because it's not clear. The way I think we would generally translate this is darkness that could be felt. Darkness that could be felt. Let's take a look at Rashi. And then, God willing, Torah Tmima. Vayamesh choshech. Vayachashich alehem choshech. The darkness would envelop them. Yoter michoshko shel laila. Darker than the darkness of light. V'choshech shel laila.
Of night.
Yes. Did you not hear me say that?
You said light.
No, I would. Okay, so an N and an L can sometimes sound. I did say night. I meant, if I said light, forgive me. I meant night. Probably because I was seeing the la of Lila. V'choshech, thank you. V'choshech shel laila, and the darkness of night, ya'amish v'yachashich od, would become even dark. It would thicken and become even darker. And now he goes into Vayamesh, right? Kamo, and he gives us a little bit of grammatical background now. He says Vayamesh is as if it were written Vayamesh. And he says that as if there's an elliptical aleph. There's a aleph that became elided into the word. And he says, Yesh lanu tevot harbe. There are many words. We have many words. Chaserot aleph, which miss the aleph. Lefi she'ein havarat ha'aleph nikeret kolkach. Because the expression, the pronunciation of the aleph isn't so clear. It isn't so. It's sort of almost. It's a softer pronunciation. It isn't that recognizable when you say an aleph. Ein hakatuv maktin al chesrona. And the scripture is not fussy when it's missing. Okay, it doesn't insist on it being there. Kagun, and he gives examples. Isaiah 13, Lo Yahel Sham Aravi. An Arab will not pitch his tent there. Kamo Lo Ya'ahel. Okay, as if it was saying Ya'ahel, and you can see how the would become elided into the Yahel. Lo Yate Ohalo, he's explaining. It means he will not pitch his tent. To tent, he won't tent there. From Ohel, right? The word for tent in Hebrew. V'chein Shmuel bet kaf bet, and in Samuel 2, chapter 22, V'tazreni chayil. So it says V'tazreni chayil, kamo v'tazreni, as if it was saying V'tazreni, Azor, Aleph, Zayin, Resh, is to gird me with strength. The Onkelos, Tirgame, however, he says Onkelos translates this Lashon Hasara, as if that this Yamesh means to remove, okay? Kamo, and he gives this wonderful example. It's a famous verse from, let me see, Lo Yamish. There's this statement which God says to Joshua that he will be successful as long as the Torah is never removed from his mouth. Lo Yamish. It should never be removed. But and this is the Aramaic itself. Batar de Yaadeh Koval or Kaval Lailia. Here it is. Batar de Yaadeh Kaval Laila. After it is removed, Yaadeh would be the removal in the face of night. And he explains what this means. In other words, after the darkness of night has departed, it's going to be even further. There's going to be, I believe it means there'll still be darkness, is what he's trying to say. In other words, it's going to be consecutive. Rashi is not happy with that. But he explains what Onkelos means. Kesheagia samuch laor. When night is, he's talking about yagia, when it reaches samuch laor, close to the light, meaning when night is coming to an end, right? Laor hayom, to the light of day, there's not going to be the light of day. He says, aval ein hadibur miyushav al havav. But he says that it doesn't make sense because the sentence says right here, because it says, Vayhi choshech, there will be darkness, and then it says Vayamesh choshech. So if it says there's going to be light, then that doesn't make sense to say, and the light will be removed, right? I believe this is what he's referring to, that this does not sit well, right?
Yeah, it'll be darkness, and the darkness will be
removed. Doesn't make sense, is what he's saying. Let me make sure he goes on. Okay. Shehu katuv achar vahi choshech. That's it. Umidrash agada, and a midrashic approach to this, Potro explains this word vayamesh, lashon memashesh, has to do with feeling, to be able to touch. And this is a reference to Memashesh Batzhoraim. This is in the curses in Deuteronomy 28, where it says, to grope about at noon. Shahaya kaful umechupal. He says it was doubled over and then doubled over again. Va'av and thick. Ad shahaya bo mamash, until you could actually feel the darkness. That the darkness was just so thick darkness, and it was so thick you could feel it. Right. Now let's take a look at Torah Tamima. and he has a really original sort of way of looking at this. Whoops, it's up here. Yeah, here it is. Vayamesh choshech. Magid HaKatuv. Scripture tells us the Keshaya HaMitzri Omed. This is actually in a later Rashi, which we haven't gotten to yet, right? But it says that when the Egyptian would stand, Lo haya yachol leshev, he wasn't able to sit down. Ukesheyashav lo yuchal la'amod, and if he was sitting down, he wouldn't be able to stand. In other words, so you can get a picture of this, that the darkness was so thick that he couldn't move. All right, it was so thick that he couldn't move in it. Mipnei shehu mash ba'afela, and so this is how I understood what Torah Tamima was saying here, because he was groping in the darkness. Emar vayamesh choshech, as it says, and it was darkness which required he would grope in the darkness. Let's take a look at Torah Tamima now. Umevu'ar b'midrashim, and it's explained in the midrashim. Shehachoshech haya ka'ovi dinar. It says that the darkness was the thickness of a dinar, of a coin. That's how thick the darkness was. It says explicitly that it was the thickness of a dinar. Uklal ha'inyan mufla ma'od. And he says, what's it talking about? He says, this is really amazing. I mean, perplexing, startling. Demashayach, because what does lahat pis shiur mamashut b'choshech? How is it possible to be able to express an amount with regards to darkness? Right? I mean, how can you say the darkness was a thickness of a dinar, of a silver dollar? It doesn't make sense. V'gam tzarich yun, and it requires further investigation. Devlefi piresh Rashi, because according to Rashi's explanation, shehaya kol meshech hama'et la'et. Rashi explains that the length of time of 24 hours, kulo laila, was all night. In other words, it was unmitigated night. V'lo haya yom klal, and there was no day whatsoever. Im kain, if this were the case, if we were saying that for 3 solid days or 6 solid days, as you'll see later on, there was nothing but night, nothing but darkness, he says, Im kain, if you're saying this, if you're claiming this, nishtanu sidrei bereshit, we're saying that the natural order of the world was interrupted. And this is very hard to understand. Because we actually have a statement, and this is right after Noah's flood, where the Holy One, blessed be He, promised to Noach, ulevanav, and to his children, his offspring, v'yom v'layla yo yishpotu, day and night will never cease. V'lulei mistafina lahamtzi davar chadash, and were it not for the fact that I am concerned about suggesting a whole new approach, ma'od, a very new approach, hava amina, I would say, the inyan hachoshech haya lo ba'avir, that this business of darkness had nothing to do with the atmosphere, with the air, rak be'enei hanashim. It had to do with people's eyes. V'hainu, and that is to say, shaya matuach tavlul al ishun ha'ayin, and that is that there were cataracts over their pupils. V'amru chachamim, and this is where our sages said she'oto hatavlul, that this cataract haya looks like namush bayad, that you could actually feel this cataract. the gam haya, and in fact, this cataract, ka'ovi dinar, was the thickness of a dinar, the necha hakol, and it all makes sense.
Wait, how can he say it's a davar chadash me'od and also say chachamim amru? It's a he's saying chachamim, when the chachamim mentioned the thickness, they were talking. His new idea is that what they were talking about was the thickness of a cataract.
Correct. They don't say specifically that they were talking about cataracts. That's his.
I see. That's his innovation.
I know, and it's my mind was blown when I read this.
Okay.
I mean, who ever thought of that? But it does make a lot of sense.
In light of Noah, it makes sense, but also because the plague was just for the Egyptians, and if night were removed,
that's
for
right.
everybody.
That's right. That's right.
And I think the locusts were also a foreshadow, because it also mentioned in the locust plague that it was causing darkness because of the huge swarm.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought, wow, this guy is so brilliant, really.
Yeah. Oh, and it says covered at Ein Haaretz. We have that phrase, the eye of the land was covered.
Right. Which is
earlier on.
Right.
So that's an image, a similar image to a cataract.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is. You're right about that. You're right. And it's sort of suggesting that. But who ever thought of that? I mean, until I actually read this, I never would have gone in that direction. Never would have thought of it.
Maybe somebody had a relative or something who had a cataract and he goes, oh my God, that's it.
I don't know. I think
it's just like darkness, and it's so thick and it feels awful. It's like, I don't know. I've never had one, so I don't know.
Right. But it certainly makes sense. Certainly makes sense. We do have a little bit of time. We have like 3 minutes, so we can get back into the text. I can screen share once again, and we can look further. It's all good. Okay, let me do that. We'll go back to the next. Right. Okay, here we go. We had this. We're on to 22. Vayet Moses stretched et yado ala shamayim, and he stretched his hand over the heavens. Vahi choshech afela, and there was deep darkness. B'chol eretz Mitzrayim, in the entire land of Egypt. Shloshet yamim, for 3 days. Let's see if there's anything here. Yep.
Yeah, a lot.
Here we go. Right. Vahi choshech afela shloshet yamim, and there was deep darkness for 3 days. Choshech shel ofel. He was saying, a darkness that was, I translated as gloom, gloominess, but I think trying to understand exactly here what gloominess means, but I think he's talking of intensity of the darkness. Shelo ra'u ish et achiv, that a person couldn't see his fellow, otan shalosh yamim, for those 3 days. And he says this is in Bishmot Rabbah, I believe, in Shmot Rabbah. V'od shloshet yamim, and another 3 days, acherim, means other 3 days. Choshech muchpal al zeh, darkness that was doubled, was even more intense. Shelo kamu ish. Here we go. This is what was referred to by Torah Tmima. Shelo kamu ish mitachtav, that a person couldn't move is what it means. Yoshev ein yachol la'amod, someone who was seated wasn't able to stand. V'omed ein yachol le'shev, and one who was seated wasn't able. And one who was standing wasn't capable of sitting down. And this is Shmot Rabbah, and I believe he's saying Iyain Sham. He says, look into Shmot Rabbah over this verse. V'lama, this is a famous interpretation. V'lama hevi alehem choshech. So why did God bring darkness over the Egyptians? Shahayu Yisrael. This is quite chilling, actually, that there were amongst the Israelites, but Oto Hador, in that generation, Rishaim, wicked people. Velo Hayu Rotzim Latzeit, and they had no desire to leave Egypt. They didn't want to leave Egypt because why were the Israelites leaving Egypt?
Because of the slavery?
No, they were leaving Egypt in order to serve the Lord.
Well, okay, so other people didn't want to go serve the Lord. Or
Or
they just didn't want to leave Egypt because they didn't want to leave Egypt.
Well, maybe so, but they didn't want to serve the Lord. They didn't want
Yeah.
that little
Their
part of it.
choice, one
That's
or the
what
other, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Vametu b'shloshit yemei ha'afelai. And they died during these 3 days of darkness. Okay, I'll keep going. And so why was the darkness? Kedei shelo yir'u mitzrim b'mapalatam. And so that the Egyptians would not see their destruction. Vayomru, and think, af hein lukin kamonu. They're being punished just like we are. So that's one reason. And by the way, I will tell you parenthetically that according to tradition, more Israelites died during those 3 days than were remaining. The majority of Israelites died during those 3 days. And I feel like it's reinforcing the antithesis of Gott mit uns, that somehow one is justified to be on a certain side. And that this, the self-criticism in a way, I think is very powerful.
But I'm sure there were good people on both sides.
Of course. Just like in Charlottesville, is that right?
Yep.
Yes.
That's almost over.
Yes. Well, they still.
Well, it's almost being addressed. Let's put it this way.
So it's 8:02. I'm going to stop here. Yes, I hope they are vigilant.
Yes, that would be nice.
It's almost beginning.
Yep.
Yes. Let me get this in here. Let me try and do this.
Well,
There
this,
we go.
so yeah, and there's one more Rashi after this, but this stuff has provided us with some really interesting information, and it makes sense. The
Yes.
thing about the cataracts and the thing about
No.
the Israelites who didn't want to go.
Right. Very interesting. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.